America barreling towards a recession? According to the Moody's Analytics chief economist, the answer may be yes, saying 22 states and Washington, D.C. are either at risk or already in a recession.
Remember when President Trump's tariffs were supposed to crush consumers and trigger a recession? Well, the same experts who predicted doom and gloom are now admitting GDP is up, inflation is down, and stocks have rebounded to hit record highs.
And there is a new snapshot of America's economy this morning showing the rich are driving its recovery. So some new data reveals the wealthiest 10% of households account for nearly half of all U.S. spending. That is the highest level in more than 3 decades.
Recessions don't arrive the way most people expect. They don't start with sirens. They don't start with headlines screaming collapse. They start quietly. While national numbers still look okay on paper, something very different is happening underneath. State budgets are tightening, housing markets are stalling, jobs are disappearing in clusters, not everywhere at once, but in very specific places. And that's the key thing most people miss. A recession doesn't hit the entire country evenly. It hits states first. Some states enter economic stress years before the rest of the country even realizes what's happening. Their housing markets crack earlier. Their tax revenues shrink faster. Their residents start leaving, not because they want to, but because they have to. Right now, that process is already underway. Debt levels are rising. Interest costs are exploding. Migration patterns are shifting. And behind the official optimism, entire state economies are quietly absorbing pressure they were never built to handle. This isn't about panic. It's about pattern recognition. Because if the U.S. does slide deeper into a recession, history shows the damage won't be evenly spread. Some states will feel it first, and much harder than others. Today, we're breaking down the 12 states most exposed, the warning signs already flashing, and why these particular places are far more vulnerable than the headlines suggest. Before we go any further, I want to be very clear. This video is not predicting the collapse of the United States. It's not telling anyone to panic, and it's not fear content. What we're discussing are structural risks, the kind that build slowly and quietly, long before they ever become obvious. We're talking about things like budget stress, housing affordability, job concentration, debt exposure, and migration trends. Factors that matter at the state level, not just nationally. This isn't about headlines. It's about understanding where pressure is building and why. Because the people who recognize economic shifts early don't panic, they prepare. One of the biggest mistakes people make during a recession is assuming it hits everywhere the same way. It doesn't. A recession doesn't break the economy evenly. It exposes weak foundations. Every state runs on a different engine. Some depend heavily on consumer spending, tourism, construction, or real estate. When people pull back, travel slows, or borrowing becomes expensive, those states feel the pain almost immediately. Other states are more insulated. They rely on government spending, healthcare systems, or diversified industries that don't rise and fall as sharply with the economic cycle. That's why during downturns, you don't see a single national story. You see very different outcomes depending on where you live. Some states bend, others crack, and a few barely feel it at all. Understanding this difference is critical because it explains why certain states start breaking down long before the rest of the country even realizes something is wrong. Before we start naming states, it's important to explain how these risks are identified, because this isn't guesswork and it's not fear-driven. We're looking at measurable pressure points. First, job concentration. States that rely too heavily on one or two industries, especially volatile ones like tech, tourism, construction, or energy, tend to unravel faster when those sectors slow. Second, housing affordability compared to income. When home prices and rents rise far faster than wages, demand becomes fragile. It doesn't take a collapse, just a slowdown, for that imbalance to snap. Third, migration trends. When people stop moving in or start moving out, tax revenues weaken, housing demand softens, and local economies lose momentum. We also look at state and local debt levels, pension obligations, and how dependent budgets are on continued growth. States built on constant expansion struggle when growth stalls. So this list isn't about panic, it's about pressure. These are the states where multiple stress points are stacking up at the same time, making them far more vulnerable if the broader economy weakens further. With that context in mind, these are the states where economic pressure is already building beneath the surface. Some are still growing on paper, some still look strong from the outside. But when you look closer, the foundations tell a different story. Let's start the countdown, beginning with a state that many people would never expect to be on this list. Starting our list at number 12 is Indiana, a state that often flies under the radar. Indiana's economy is built around manufacturing, logistics, and agriculture, sectors that usually provide stability during normal cycles. But that same structure makes the state highly sensitive when consumer demand slows. As borrowing costs remain elevated, factory orders begin to soften, overtime hours shrink, and smaller suppliers feel the pressure first. Housing hasn't collapsed here, but momentum has clearly faded. Price growth has stalled, listings are taking longer to move, and buyers are becoming more cautious. But it represents the early stage of economic strain, the kind that quietly builds beneath the surface and becomes more visible if a broader recession takes hold. Next up comes South Carolina, a state that benefited enormously from momentum. Over the past few years, it rode a powerful wave of population growth, housing construction, and consumer activity. That momentum lifted local economies and tax revenues, but it also made the state more exposed to shifts in confidence. Tourism, construction, and discretionary spending sit at the center of South Carolina's economy, and those sectors tend to soften early when households pull back. As affordability pressures rise and in-migration begins to slow, the pace of growth is clearly easing. This isn't a sudden breakdown, it's a cooling cycle. But in a recession, states built on continuous inflows and expansion often feel the slowdown sooner than expected. Sitting at number 10 is Arizona, a state that perfectly captures what happens when growth runs faster than fundamentals. Over the past few years, rapid population inflows pushed housing prices sharply higher, especially across the Phoenix metro. But wages didn't rise at the same pace. Now, with interest rates staying elevated, that imbalance is being tested. Buyers are still there, but fewer of them qualify, and they're far more cautious. The risk in Arizona isn't sudden collapse. It's a slow recalibration where prices and demand have to realign with what residents can actually afford. When growth is driven by speed rather than sustainability, even a mild recession can expose the strain. Landing at number 9 is Nevada, a state that lives and breathes consumer confidence. Tourism, entertainment, hospitality, and discretionary spending power much of the economy, which works beautifully in strong times and becomes a pressure point when households tighten budgets. Las Vegas is already seeing signs of softer hotel demand, slower housing activity, and more cautious spending. Nevada isn't unraveling, but it is highly sensitive. When consumers pull back even slightly, job growth cools, housing demand weakens, and tax revenues feel the impact quickly. That sensitivity is what places Nevada higher on the risk list if a broader downturn takes hold. Sliding into number 8 is Kansas. Kansas is often overlooked in national headlines. Its economy leans heavily on agriculture and manufacturing, providing some stability, but slow population growth and revenue sensitivity make it quietly exposed. Housing markets here rarely crash dramatically. Instead, they soften gradually. That slow decline is deceptive. It gives the illusion of stability while underlying pressures build, making downturns harder to spot and recover from. At number 7, we have Mississippi. Mississippi faces deeper structural challenges. Limited economic diversification, lower average incomes, and higher poverty rates leave little buffer when economic conditions deteriorate. Even a mild recession can amplify financial strain on households, businesses, and state budgets. Housing may not collapse overnight, but prices and demand will feel persistent pressure, showing how long-term vulnerabilities can quietly escalate during broader downturns. All right, we're halfway through the list, but if your state hasn't appeared yet, don't click away. This first half highlights where risk is stacking up the fastest, the states most exposed if the economy slows further. Take a moment, look around your city, your neighborhood, or even your investments. Are you noticing changes yet? Slower sales, rising vacancies, or stalled housing demand? Drop a quick comment below with your state or city. Let's see what's happening on the ground. Real experiences help everyone understand the bigger picture. Now buckle up. As we move into the next states, the risks become even more pronounced, and understanding them early could make all the difference. Sliding into number 6 is Louisiana. The state's economy leans heavily on energy, shipping, and government spending, sectors that can swing quickly when the broader economy slows. When energy prices dip or federal funding tightens, state revenues feel it almost immediately, putting pressure on budgets and public services. Housing here is closely tied to jobs, so when employment softens, demand for homes drops and prices adjust. Recovery can be slow because Louisiana doesn't have as much economic diversity to buffer these shocks. For residents and investors alike, this means that even modest economic changes can ripple through the housing market faster than you might expect. Sliding into the top 5 is Colorado. From the outside, it seems solid. High incomes, a skilled workforce, and a thriving tech scene. But the real challenge lies in affordability. Housing prices have surged far faster than wages, and recent tech layoffs are shining a light on that gap. The risk here isn't a sudden collapse. It's a slow, ongoing adjustment that pressures households, stretches local budgets, and forces buyers to reconsider where they can realistically live. Even strong economies can face strain when costs outpace income. Climbing to number 4 is Massachusetts, a state known for its world-class universities, healthcare, and biotech industries. On paper, it looks untouchable. Yet behind the prestige, extremely high housing costs and slowing job growth are creating tension. Families are feeling the pinch, and local governments are starting to see the effects in tax revenue. When a high-cost state experiences even modest economic slowdowns, the ripple effects can be surprisingly large, from real estate to small businesses. Landing at number 3 is Georgia, a state that's enjoyed rapid expansion over the past decade. Atlanta and its surrounding areas brought booming jobs, rising housing demand, and a surge of new residents. But growth has limits. Affordability challenges and infrastructure strain are now catching up, while migration and consumer spending are beginning to cool. Georgia's risk isn't about collapse, it's about momentum reversing. Regions that expanded fastest will feel the pressure first, showing how even vibrant economies aren't immune to the subtle signs of a slowdown. Sliding into number 2 is Michigan, a state built on manufacturing, autos, and industrial supply chains. These industries give Michigan its strength, but they also make it highly sensitive to economic swings. When interest rates rise or consumer demand slows, factory orders drop and layoffs can follow quickly. Housing markets don't crash overnight here, but slower sales and rising inventory start to show cracks in the local economy. Michigan has faced recessions before, which gives it experience, but it also proves how fast conditions can deteriorate when demand softens. For residents and investors alike, these subtle warning signs are the first signals that caution is needed. Finally, at number 1 is Illinois, sitting at the top of this list for its relative vulnerability if a recession deepens. Decades of budget shortfalls, massive pension obligations, and slow population growth have left the state with very little financial breathing room. Cities like Chicago face high housing costs, strained infrastructure, and rising unemployment during economic slowdowns, while smaller towns struggle with declining tax revenue and shrinking local demand. Even minor shocks, like slowing consumer spending or moderate job losses, can ripple through employment, housing, and public services, creating compounded effects that move faster than in other states. Illinois doesn't crumble instantly, but the pressures are structural and persistent, making careful observation and strategic planning essential for anyone living, working, or investing here. Now that we've seen Illinois at the top of the list, it's important to understand who this actually affects. Homeowners should watch local housing affordability and job trends. Prices may adjust, but a slower market doesn't mean disaster. It's about making informed decisions. Renters could see rising vacancies, which gives more options, but also reflects broader economic stress. So understanding local demand helps you navigate smarter. Investors need to be cautious about exposure to single industries or high-cost regions, because structural pressures can slowly impact returns even without a dramatic collapse. And for people planning to move, paying attention to migration patterns, housing costs, and job availability reveals subtle signs of where markets are cooling or staying resilient. The key takeaway is calm awareness. Everyone on this list can take practical steps to protect themselves, because knowledge is the best tool when risks are quietly building beneath the headlines. If you're noticing changes in your local market, slowing home sales, price adjustments, or shifts in job opportunities, I want to hear about it. Drop your city or state in the comments and share what you're actually seeing on the ground. Real experiences matter more than headlines, and your insights could help someone else make smarter decisions. And as we wrap up, remember, the goal isn't to predict the future perfectly. It's to understand where risks are quietly building, so you can act early rather than react late. Staying informed, calm, and prepared gives you an advantage in a market that's constantly shifting. Knowledge is your strongest tool, and patience is your best ally. If this video helped you see the bigger picture, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future updates. And don't forget, we also made a video exploring why the 2026 housing crash could be worse than 2008, and no one is prepared, a topic that's helping thousands understand the shifts in housing, jobs, and migration trends. Check it out on the end screen. You won't want to miss it. I will see you there.